everyone, it is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is my regular Thursday series where we talk about making music, talk about composing, arranging, improvising, playing by ear, all the different things that are involved in creating music. So as has been the case the last few weeks and going forward for the next few weeks, we're going to be focusing on the material that we're covering in the basic music theory course, but in particular looking at the practical applications of this. And so I have actually something, a little side little journey we're going to take for a little while today because a number of reasons it seems to make sense. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is just welcome anyone who wants to ask any questions about the material that we're actually working on. You know, if there were things that came up in going through the lessons on the basic music theory course or going through the exercises, working on the project. If any questions have come up, always happy to be addressing those. So the main topic that we're dealing with right now has to do with the chromatic scale and intervals. And I'm trying to be as practical as I can about this because a lot of effort gets spent usually in just making sure you know how to spell different intervals, making sure you can calculate what the interval between two notes is accurately, and then also singing all these different intervals or recognizing them when you hear them. And it's usually presented outside the context of any practical application. And I'm all about practical applications. So that's what we're going to be focusing on mostly today. And for instance, I'm going to just talk briefly about my theme music here, and then we're going to jump into something else. Then we're going to look at a couple of your projects. Now, I'm going to give you a heads up right now that Circle, the site where the whole community, all this stuff is hosted, they're having some issues right now with their hosting of files and permissions, and I'm not able to download stuff that you've posted right now. So Graham, I know Graham Archer had a PDF that I can see right here. I remember looking at it. I can even remember some of the music in it, but I can't see the PDF. So that's kind of a drag. So if they happen to have it fixed, you know, they know about it, they're working on it. If they happen to have it fixed by the end of today, I can download that one. If you can get a plan B, like maybe uploading that to musescore.com and sending me the link, that would be awesome. And the same is true, John Foster. I see you also have something that you uploaded directly here, and I can't download that right now. So, but if you can post it to musescore.com and put the link in, I can access that. So unfortunately, that's where things are. But don't worry, we got plenty else we can be talking about, including my memory of what Graham posted, also what Michael Gold posted, and these couple other things that I mentioned I want to talk about. So we got lots to talk about. Let's dig in. So one of the things that I want to mention here, just in relation to the chromatic scale specifically. This piece here is in the key of A minor. By this piece, I mean my Music Masterclass theme. And Graham, so what that would mean is posting it to musescore.com, you can make it unlisted, and then make sure you give me the secret link. You have to hit the share button and then get the secret link, and then I'll let it access it. So if you can pull that off, that would be awesome. So this piece is in the key of A minor. Next week, I've already got the lessons kind of uploaded, ready to go. Next week, we'll delve into minor keys. But, you know, for now, we can just say, hey, it's just like C major, except that the tonic is A instead of C. All right, that's how we'll talk about this. But you'll see there's all sorts of notes, all sorts of accidentals outside the key. And the question comes up of how to spell these notes. And so one of the things that I've made the point, and we can see it here, is when a line is ascending, like this violin one line is ascending, right? Let me turn the volume back up. So that line is ascending, so this note is spelled as C sharp. This note is spelled D sharp. That is because the line is ascending. You want to spell chromatic notes to indicate their resolution. These notes exist for a reason. Notes that aren't in the key almost always exist for a specific reason, having to do with harmony, having to do with voice leading, whatever. And as I discuss in the course, that usually means they're going to resolve by step. And you want to spell these chromatic notes in a way that makes that clear. So that's why this is called C sharp and not D flat, because it's resolving to D. We want to see, we don't care about where it came from, we care about where it's going. That's why this note here is G sharp instead of A flat, because it's resolving up. That is why this note here is D sharp instead of E flat, because it is resolving up. There's other places where the spelling of notes, and in fact, in point of fact, almost all these notes are resolving up because of what's going on with them. So I don't really have places where I can really talk about the alternatives, and even the places, here's a flat coming down. Right? So what is this note here? It's an alto clef. I guess it's B flat coming down to A. And so that time it's spelt with a flat because it's coming down. And it's not, and here's another flat. Here's a G flat coming down to F, right? So spelling goes that way. That's just a thing to know about. But as we go on, we'll talk more about context. So what I want to do here is take a little break from me talking. And I'm going to play some music for you that maybe some of you heard recently, especially those of you in the UK. Most of you, or many of you, I'm sure, were watching the coronation. For us, it came on at some ridiculous hour in the morning, but I've seen little clips here and there. And I want to talk about this piece here by William Byrd that was performed during the coronation. And so I'm going to play a portion of it, and then we're going to take a look at the music, and I want to talk about this with respect to intervals, and then jump off from there to returning to talking about our project here. So this is this Mass for Four Voices. It's the Gloria, and I've got the sheet music pulled up because someone has entered it into MuseScore, and it looks good to me, so we're going to follow along. All right? So here's the piece. That's sort of an introduction. All right. So that is the first portion there of this Gloria. And yeah, it is a beautiful piece of music. Obviously, well, I don't know about obviously, but it stems from the Renaissance. And I want to talk about this a little bit with respect to intervals. And I was going to be following along with the sheet music, but something happened to make me think things were off a little bit. The voices, when they entered, I was like, wait a minute, is this the right voice? And so I decided I would just rather watch the choir than try to fumble around keeping my place. Okay, so what I want to do is point out that at the beginning of the piece here, there are only two voices, right? It's only the sopranos and the altos. What I'm about to do here is something that you're going to see. Well, this was very similar to what I did in setting up the project where we were talking about making those, right? Talking about making melodies over that bass line, which we're going to turn back to in a moment. What I did was I talked about the intervals between every combination of notes. Anytime there was a bass note and a soprano note being heard at the same time, whether they were played at the same time or whether one of the note was held over from earlier, but we could still hear it. Anytime we can hear two notes at the same time, we want to know about the interval. And that this is just a basic fact. When we're analyzing music, this is something we want to do. And one of the interesting things about this is, in doing this, we almost never care about major versus minor intervals. I care if something is a sixth. I don't care if it's a major sixth or a minor sixth, because when it comes to talking about consonants and dissonance, it's the same, right? So a minor third is consonant, so is a major third. Minor sixth is consonant, so is a major sixth. Minor second is dissonant, so is a major second. So we can often just go off of just the letter names, count lines and spaces, not worry about the exact number of half steps. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of simplify in that way. We have an F against a C. That's a fifth, right? Then we have the C still sounding while the lower C comes in. That's an octave. Then the upper C continues to sound while an E flat comes in against it. That is a sixth. Then the top note goes down to G while the bottom note, E flat, is still sounding. That's a third. And then we have two notes sounding together, B flat and D flat. That is a sixth. And then we have A flat and C, another sixth. And then we have G sounding all by itself, but then it's joined by a fifth, a C. That's a fifth. And when I talk about fifths, it's going to be a perfect fifth, right? If there's ever a diminished fifth or an augmented fifth, then we'll have to talk about that. You can keep going through this whole piece this way. The point that I want to make is every single interval I've talked about has been consonant. We've had fifths, we've had octaves, we've had thirds, we've had sixths. We have had no seconds, no sevenths, no fourths. And in fact, I can keep going in this piece, and let's talk about the first time we come to anything that's dissonant. I'm just going to play it from here. So just in that passage, oh, now I see how I got confused. There's the tenor entrance. Okay, never mind. Everything was fine. I just got confused looking at it. Everything for those first 5 measures, you can go through this. You can go through the math with me on this. Every single one is got your melody, John. Great. So every single one of those is consonant through the first 5 measures. The first little bit of dissonance we get is in measure 6. We have a third at the beginning of the measure, E flat against C, and then the soprano moves up to an F, just briefly, just for 1 quarter note, and then immediately moves on to the G. This is called a passing tone. Consonant, brief dissonance, consonant. And it's even not that dissonant because I've talked about how fourths are kind of special and only in certain cases are they really dissonant. This is only 2 voices. Maybe it's considered dissonance, but neither of these voices are the bass. And so even this is not a very strong dissonance. But in any case, it's also very inconspicuous in the texture. It just happens briefly there. Now, later on, the G comes in, then the B flat, comes in, there's a sixth, then the alto moves down to an A flat. So now we have G and A flat being sounded at the same time, a major 7th. Well, that is dissonant. And that top note that had the G comes down to an F. So we have the G, then the A flat comes in, and then the top voice comes down to F. And now we have a consonance. We have a sixth. So that dissonance was resolved by step. And then we have a fifth. And then we have this really cool thing here that happens. This is a really cool thing. The F against the B flat. Then the B flat goes down to G and creates another seventh. And then the soprano comes down to resolve that dissonance again. So in both of these cases, we have dissonance where one note, when the G came in, it was perfectly fine. But then the other voice moved and created some dissonance. And then the first voice moved to resolve it. So a voice comes in with a consonance, and then the other voice creates a dissonance. And then the first voice says, well, I guess I got to fix your mess, and cleans it up. So that situation is called a suspension. When you do, if you go on and take either the harmony course or the counterpoint course, but especially the counterpoint course, that idea of suspensions is going to come up all over the place. And this particular pattern here, where you have a consonance and then a note creates a dissonance. It's a little unusual to have leapt into that dissonance, but not a big deal. So we have consonants. One voice moves to create dissonance. Then the other voice moves to fix the dissonance. That's a suspension. And yeah, we talk about that a lot. And this is all based on knowing which intervals are consonant, which are dissonant, and really thinking about where you're using them. So this is all consonants other than that one brief passing tone and those couple of suspensions here. And the suspensions happened at the end of the phrase. That's also something that's really common in Renaissance music, especially. Keep things consonant at first, and then if you're going to bring in dissonance, you bring it in kind of towards the end of phrases. By the Baroque, then the use of dissonance is a little freer. So that's the main thing I want to talk about as far as this piece, is just pointing out how knowing intervals and making this analysis of where they're consonant, where they're dissonant is important. It's how great. I got both your pieces, John and Graham, so that's fantastic. So we're going to take a look at them now very shortly. But there's two other things that I want to point out about this William Byrd piece that are good to know. One is this passage right here. We have soprano, and this is middle C, right? This is treble clef, but with an 8 below it, meaning it sounds an octave lower than written. That's how tenor music is often written. So we have middle C and A flat. We have this thing going on here, parallel thirds, basically. Parallel thirds are beloved of musicians throughout history. In fact, they sort of got a bad rap for being too easy, too sweet sounding, and you like to balance them against contrary motion. And so that's what William Byrd does here. He has the tenor and bass have the parallel motion, but then it's answered by soprano and alto having contrary motion, soprano coming down while the alto goes up. But all of these intervals are consonant intervals. And if you're going to have that sort of thing, parallel motion, thirds and sixths are the way to do it. Parallel thirds and parallel sixths are the intervals that work for this. And I probably wouldn't have to look very far to find places where Byrd uses parallel sixths instead of thirds, but just take my word for it. It's just as good sounding. So that's one thing I want to point out. This idea of parallel thirds, parallel sixths being really nice. Parallel fifths, parallel octaves, not so much. Is not a sound used in Renaissance music. It's used in, rock and roll. Not used in Renaissance music, and not really used much in between there either. Maybe Bela Bartok was the first, person I know of to exploit parallel fifths on purpose. So that was one of the other things I wanted to talk about with this. The final thing I want to talk about with respect to this piece that's pretty important is the fact that this piece is in 4 voices, and that is a common texture, because then you can have 2 female voices, 2 male voices, soprano and alto, tenor and bass, or you might have men singing the alto part or women singing a tenor part. That's fine too. But basically, two high voices, two low voices, and they balance each other well. And also, that's like how string quartets are set up, with a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass kind of sound in the two violins, viola, and cello. It's just a really common way of organizing things. And what happens is, when you have all four notes sounding at once, you have an interesting question. Well, how do we make sure that there's no dissonances? And it's really about calculating all the intervals. So like, here's the first place we hear four notes really all, well, I guess even right here, we hear all four notes at once. We hear the F, and no, there's only two notes sounding at once, because those are both Fs. So let me come to this spot here. We have two B flats, a D flat, and an F. Well, you could calculate all your intervals here. From F to D flat is a third. From D flat to B flat is a third. From F to B flat is a fifth. And then there's just another B flat, so it's just more of the same. That sound, F, D flat, and B flat, is a triad. And then you'll notice one of the notes was duplicated. Well, in fact, that is the way it's always going to be done, because what we're going to see as we talk about chords is, if you want to have nothing but consonant intervals, there's only so many ways to do it. And one of them is to stack two thirds on top of each other, and the other is to stack a third with a fourth above it. And those are your only possibilities. Any other possibility of stacking intervals is going to create dissonance somewhere. So what you find out is there's these two possibilities. And those of you who already know about chords will recognize this is what's called a root position triad, and that's called a first inversion triad. Right here is a first inversion triad. I have an E flat, a G, and a C. So E flat, G, and C. So there's a third between those, a fourth between those, which is okay because it's not involving the bass, a sixth between those, right? So those intervals are all consonant, and then just one of those notes gets doubled, because there's no other note I could add to that collection without creating dissonance. So we're not allergic to creating dissonance at all, but when we do it, we're going to resolve it properly and deal with it, etc. So this study of intervals is really kind of crucial to understanding where harmony comes from and how you're going to work with multiple voices, but multiple parts in a piece. And in particular, in the Renaissance, they didn't really have the concept of chords. They just thought about intervals. But by thinking about intervals, you're going to create chords, because you have no choice. As soon as you have three independent notes and you don't want dissonance, you're going to create chords. That you have no choice in the matter. So the study of intervals is where the study of chords eventually comes from. And if you're dealing with Renaissance music specifically, you can identify the chords. I can totally look at this and say, hey, that's a C minor chord in first inversion. I can look at that other thing and say, hey, that's a B flat minor chord in root position. I can do all that kind of analysis, but that's not what William Byrd would have been thinking about. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what his time was, and if the first people to start talking about chords had reached his neck of the woods, and if he was familiar with that or not. I'm not the scholar to be able to tell you that, but it was towards the late Renaissance that chord-based thinking started to really take over. Prior to that, it was mostly interval-based thinking, but you ended up with chords anyhow. So anyhow, that's some stuff I wanted to point out about this piece. Okay, so this piece is the kind of piece, and we talk about a different William Byrd example, but in my counterpoint course that we'll have the cohort kind of approach on that, later in the year, but we'll probably do the harmony course first. So that's all that. Meanwhile, we managed to get up improvised melodies, and I have Michael's version also, which was working already for me, so I can talk about all of these. So what I'm going to do is make sure I have Michael's downloaded also, or just viewed. I don't even need to download it. I want to play through some of these melodies, and we're going to talk about them, all right? So I'm going to play, Michael has 4 melodies, and I made a comment, and I don't know if you all saw this in the community. I'm checking just to make sure I'm still on because there hasn't been a comment for a little while. But looks like I'm still on. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to play through these. The comment that I had made was that there were some of them I liked better than others. And I wanted to sort of see if others felt the same way as far as which ones are your favorites of these, and talk about why a little bit. All right. And Michael gave an answer that I thought was very good about his feelings about that. But I want you to check this out also. So I'm just going to play this thing. So that's the first one. That seems different than I remember it being. I don't know if you've changed it since then, but yeah, it's basically how I remember it. Here's the next one. Other than one little finger slip in there, that was basically that one. Here comes number 3. All right, good to know you haven't changed any. There was number 3. And here comes number 4. So what I'm curious about from anyone else is, thoughts about those melodies. Which of them appeals to you the most? Which parts of which of them appeal to you the most? What I'm going to do is extend invitations to all 3 of you to join me here that you can then take up as you see fit. But if I just get Graham is going to be invited, and when I talk about your piece, I'm going to put the no, I'm not going to put the invitation on now. I'm just going to do this. So right now I'm looking at Michael's. So I will invite you up, and then you're welcome to come and discuss further. And if I hear your voice, I'll know you're here, and I can also see you on the other screen. So yeah, I'm curious what other people might have to say about your feelings about this. Stephen Bryant's talking about 2 complementary halves. And so number 3, you're talking about the fact that the melody feels like the first 2 bars form one phrase, the second phrase forms a little answer to it. So, Colleen, I'm sorry that you were having trouble posting your music there. Yeah, don't know what was going wrong there. And Allison's talking about number 3 because of the distance between the parts. And that's actually an interesting observation. So, Michael, I see you're here. Welcome.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yes. By the way, are you hearing any echo from yourself?
I'm not hearing any echo.
All right, good. Then I've set myself up correctly. So Allison's comment has to do with the distance between the 2 parts. And this is an interesting comment I'm going to address, just mention first, that I know that, Allison, a lot of your experience comes from more the kind of music we were just looking at, the Renaissance music, in which there's definite expectations about spacing between parts, that we usually keep things within an octave. In a lot of other styles of music, that's not necessarily the case. The idea of a melody instrument and a bass instrument with potentially more than an octave between them is going to be extremely common as well. And so it's nice to sort of be able to sort that out, and would you still like it as much if I took that melody up, or if I took the bass line down? And in fact, in the lessons, I was playing the bass line an octave lower. So, and Graham's got a comment here too. But Michael, why don't you say a couple words, what you would want to tell us about any of these, or any of the comments that you're seeing?
Well, as I said in my post in the comments yesterday, I was just trying lots of techniques that you outlined in your presentation, just to try them out for size and see if I could make them create pleasing melodies. And in the first one, I kind of went overboard with skippiness.
Yeah.
I felt, I was trying to see how much I could do with not so stepwise, but heavily large skips. And it was an interesting exercise, but I felt like it was kind of bumpy and all over the place. So that wasn't very successful to my ear. I liked number two because there was a little dissonance between the second and third bars. There's an E flat that hangs out on the other four, and then the downbeat of the next bar, and
yeah.
So I guess that's one of the suspensions we're talking about.
Yeah, that is a suspension with a delayed resolution. We have the F. And there's consonants when the F comes in, the E flat comes in later, creates dissonance, and then the first voice moves to resolve that dissonance. Or actually, this is like dissonance and then more dissonance, and it doesn't get resolved until later, which is fine also. It's a more modern technique. Anyhow, yeah.
And then I guess I liked number four because it has some dissonance right off the bat with that E natural. And I felt like I finally hit a nice combination of some stepwise melodic ideas as well as some skips, just not overly skippy. And I stumbled into sort of developing that initial three-note motif.
Yeah.
And that made it sound much more of a contained idea to me, that whole line.
Yeah, I would say definitely the development of that motif, just the very idea of that already is very engaging, right? Right off the bat, you say something and then you repeat it, at a different pitch level so that there's something similar about it in the rhythm and the shape of the line, but it's a different pitch level. And it's not just like this was a perfect fifth you started with. The next line, you didn't start with a perfect fifth. You instead went to a sixth. So it changed the interval relationships, but you kept that shape to it. So that's solid melody writing there.
I guess I didn't hear what Allison was hearing about the distance between the two parts. Maybe that's because I'm mostly a jazz player and I'm used to that kind of large distances.
Yeah, we're definitely in it. Coming from a jazz context, we'll be very accustomed to the sound of a bass and say a trumpet or whatever, and there being two octaves between them. That's a common sound, but it's not an unusual sound in Renaissance music if you relate it just to that situation of a bass instrument, say a cello, being accompanying a violin or something, because that music does exist, at least in the Baroque and so forth as well. So the first one, it's not like there's too many jumps necessarily, but there's definitely a randomness to it. I mean, I like this do-da-do-da-dum. That's a great little line. I love that that line, but then it seems sort of disconnected to other things that are happening. And so to me, it's not the existence of a big leap that's necessarily a problem, but it's making it feel necessary or logical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And the second line I really like because it also has this idea of, in a less overt way, this ba-boo-bam, boo-doo-dum is also a development of an idea. And this doo-doo-doo-dum, boo-doo-doo-doo-da is also a development of an idea. It's less overt, right? Because this line has that shape to it. This line has a different shape, but it's also 4/8 notes at the end of the measure, and somehow it feels organically related. And then this ba-boo-dum and boo-doo-dum, it's the same shape, but different rhythm. And that's interesting also. So to me, number two has that motivic quality to it, but more organic. It feels more improvised in that way. Whereas number four, that opening especially makes it feel very composed.
Right.
Not that you can't improvise things like that. So did these mostly start off as improvisations?
I guess I followed your strategy of, I wrote the bass. I did it in MuseScore, and I wrote the bass lines, the half notes, and then I started with some half notes in the melody lines as, okay, these will be my targets. These will be things that I'll emphasize. And just tried different tracks, but pretty quickly got away from the half notes on the melody line, and then I guess if this makes any sense, I was sort of improvising in MuseScore.
Yeah, I know. I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I want to make sure I get to look at some of the others here, but thank you for coming on here and sharing this and sharing a little about your thought process about it. So yeah, nice job. Loving what you're doing.
Thanks.
Okay, so what I'm going to do next here then is I have to uninvite you because you don't see a button, right? I'm always wondering about this, but
No,
you don't see a button till other
no
than
escape.
leave totally, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. See you. Thanks again, Michael. All right, so I'm going to invite Graham, and since it's going to just simplify things, I'll invite John, and then we'll you can come up when we get to you, if that works for you. And then so the same thing. I'm going to take a look at. Let's see. Whoops, that's Gloria. This is John. This is Graham. All right. I haven't even seen John's yet because I wasn't able to do it, but I have looked at Graham's a little bit, and so I have a couple thoughts there. So, Graham, if you are willing and able to join us, by all means, come on board. Meanwhile, I'm going to play. And then that's basically the first line. And I'm going to separate that from the second line because it really does feel like two separate lines. And so we can talk again about number one versus number two. Here's the next one. So, Graham, are you with us? I see you, or I see someone. No, that's John. Okay, that at least I think that's John. So Graham, if you are still with us, feel free to either be joining us if you can, or participate in the chat. But I'm going to talk a little bit. So first of all, John, looking at the screen, yeah, I know you, John. That is John. Yeah. So we'll come to you in a moment. But I do want to talk more about Graham's piece since I was just looking at it here, and so. This also obviously very motivic, right? Extremely motivic, right? Here's our motif. Right, there's our motif, and then we get a similar motif. And then again. And then again. So this is literally taking that motif and developing it through the progression. One of the observations that I would make about this is the first two here. Yeah, so Grandma, yeah, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be working, but that's unfortunate. Sorry that it's, technology is always technology, and that's just the way it is, I guess. So sorry about that. But yeah, give us any other thoughts. And I'm going to make a little change here. And yeah, and Allison's got a good point. The first 4-bar version is descending, a descending motif. The second one is ascending motif. I'm going to make a slight change to that first one here, and I want to hear your thoughts about it. So what did I do here? This is a question for chat, and I know it's behind a little bit. I took the exact same 4 bars, but I rearranged them a little bit. right? I played this bar, but then instead of playing bar 2, I played bar 4 because they have the same bass line, right? And then I left bar 3 where it was, and then I played bar 2. Basically, I swapped bars 2 and 4. I'm going to claim by doing that, I perhaps accomplished 2 things. One is it made the repetition less literal, right? This first line starts off with an octave. And then the next measure, as he has it, also starts with an octave. So basically it's more of a literal transposition as far as that goes. Whereas by substituting bar 4, I start with an octave. This next one is a sixth. And so I have a little more variety by doing that, right? And then this next line starts with a third. And then I'm back to the octave at the beginning. So one thing that switching those two did was maybe created a little more variety at the beginning. But another thing it did is created a stepwise thing in, B flat, C, D, E flat, right? So I created an ascending line in the development of the motif. That is a really common thing, a favorite technique of almost every Baroque composer going forward, of what is sometimes called a sequence, taking a melodic idea and then moving it up a step, and then moving it up another step, and then deciding when have you had enough of moving things up by step. And so that's more what you did in the second version. You've got your sequence, and then it's moving up a step every time. And then I love the fourth one has a variety to it, right? You didn't just take that same sequence a fourth time. You let it do something different. This idea of taking something, sequencing it, doing it either twice and then varying it the third time, or 3 times, then varying it the fourth time, those are both super powerful ideas, right? So yeah, I would say, Graham, your first instinct, I like a little bit better. You're right, though, that there is this issue of when is it too much? And I think this was the solution. The fact that you varied it in the fourth version here. I think that's the variation that you want. The idea of keeping the sequence going step by step 2 or 3 times, then breaking it. That's the model that you'll see used all over the place. I mean, you look at Bach, you can look at Charlie Parker, you can look at whoever you want, you're going to see that sort of thing. And yeah, the completion of the second one actually does have a cadence there, right? This going into B flat, cadence being a term for basically approaching the tonic like that. So I look at this one, this wasn't, the fourth bar there wasn't meant to be a completion, it was meant to continue, and it does continue very nicely. One of the other things that's a little awkward about this as you have it, this leap is huge, right? It's more than an octave. So I'm not going to say that leaps of more than an octave never happen or would never have a reason to happen, but they're definitely noteworthy when they happen. They are noteworthy when you have leaps of that large of an interval. And I would be thinking, like, so Bells of Westminster Abbey, I don't know if they have really large leaps like that happening a lot. My guess is maybe not. And so that might be a place where your model might have helped. Another thing relating to what we talked about in the counterpoint course is the end of this measure is a D and a D, and then the next measure is an E flat and an E flat. This is parallel octaves. So not only is there an octave between the first measure, the first beat, and the first beat of the next measure, those are both octaves, but also the last sound that we hear at the end of the first measure going in to the beginning of the second measure, they're both octaves. So we haven't, it's not like I've been explaining in the basic theory course about parallel octaves, but I've mentioned this before. And yeah, it's definitely something that you watch out for, and parallel fifths, parallel octaves, not in the sense of absolutely never doing them, but they're things you watch out for and think about. Is this doing what I want it to do? Now, some of the things I especially like about all of these, because they're moving by step, is all that you get these really interesting creation and resolution of dissonances, like dissonance, consonance, dissonance, consonance. Or here we have there's a dissonance that is resolved by step in the bottom voice. This is a dissonance, and it's resolved by step in the bottom voice, while the top voice is leaping. And so that's kind of interesting. Now, there's one thing I'm going to point out here also, and then I'm going to turn, I think, move to talking about John's piece, and that is where these leaps happen. And I almost mentioned this in my previous lesson, but I just sort of didn't. But I'm going to talk about it now. Notice that your leaps in both cases here is like you finish an idea at the end of the measure, and then there's a big leap into the next measure, right? You finish an idea here at the end of this measure, and then leap into the start of the next measure. I want to contrast this with what Johann Christian Bach does. His big dramatic leap turns out to not really be as dramatic when you look at it closer. So half note C feels a little static. Yeah, I would agree with that comment also, that if you wanted to create some more motion there, you could. That's a judgment call, because sometimes pausing right before the end of something is good also. But yeah, that's the kind of thing you want to pay attention to for sure. So this was the Johann Christian Bach melody here. The big dramatic leap didn't happen on the downbeat. It happened after the downbeat. This, I'm going to contrast it with what, it could have been. Had he leapt at the beginning of the measure, I don't think he would have done that. I think this idea of kind of completing a thought into the downbeat, then doing your big leap into the next idea, that is a style independent thing you can kind of take to the bank, is often a good idea. It's not that you never want to leap into the beginning of a measure, but this idea of finishing a previous thought somehow by resolving, by taking that line all the way into beat one, you've resolved it rhythmically, and then you start the next thought there. The other thing that I would point out about this is that even though this is a big leap, it's really a step. It could have been, right? It could have just gone up to the C instead of down. And I think I do mention that in the lesson, that sometimes these leaps are really what are called octave displacements, just to keep things from getting too rangy. And I think, but in your case here, these leaps were necessary because that's how the sequence worked. You wanted to go from the D to the E flat for that sequence to happen. So you weren't going to go up. You were definitely going to go down. But let me just perform a little surgery on that. I'm just trying something. So I'm taking this line up, and I did it in a way that didn't really make sense to me. I went all the way up to a D, which is dissonant, which to me as a jazz person was fine, but it also, I could have put in a chromatic passing tone and landed on a C here. Right? And this idea of putting in a chromatic note to slow down the ascent of that line so that we land on a C to form a consonance here. I mentioned this also in the Schumann example that I talked about a couple weeks ago, where I was talking about key relationships and how or maybe it was just last week, whenever it was, it was 2 weeks ago. I went through that Schumann example, and there was that little bit of chromatic scale, and it's like taking little baby steps to try to end on the note you want to end on the beat you want to end on it with. So that's situations like that is a good opportunity possibly for chromatic passing tones like that. All right. So anyhow, thanks, Graham, for the examples here. And yeah, it's just great to see what people are coming up with, the idea of building melodies over existing lines. And before I come to John's, I just want to return for 1 second to the Gloria here. One of the things that we'll learn about in the counterpoint course is that the way you create, in case it wasn't obvious, if I play these lines, all right, let's try it again. And this time actually hear it. Yeah, it likes to take a minute to start. I'll play it myself. Versus these, this is imitation, right? This is imitative counterpoint. We have a line being answered by so it's the same melody up a fifth, and there's some more interval calculation for you. The way you make that work is you start to write out one line, and then when you write out the other line, you calculate intervals and make sure that you write consonant intervals. And so this idea that we want to be aware of the intervals and the consonants and dissonance we create is like baked into the compositional process as well as the improvisation process. All right, so thanks again, Graham, for the music. And now, John, you can come back on here, and we're going to take a look at your melodies, which I haven't seen yet. So I'm going to let MuseScore play these for me because it's got more stuff going on that I want to try to deal with. But before I do that, what do you want to tell us about these?
Well, can you hear me?
Still?
Oh, no. I unmuted, and you can't hear me?
Still?
No?
Yeah, I'm not hearing you anymore, John.
I don't know. Yeah,
Huh.
I can't. Yeah.
Is anyone else hearing John?
Yeah, I'm talking.
Oh, wait a minute.
The mute's off.
You can hear him. Wonder why I'm not. That's so annoying. I heard you before.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead and say your piece. I'll pretend I can hear. I'll nod
Okay.
appropriately, and then
All
we'll
right.
listen to your music. So give me a little bit here, and then
All right.
and then wave when you're ready for me to play the music.
Well, basically, I saw your piece on Monday, and I played the bass line over several times. Didn't have a melody in mind. When I woke up the next morning, I had a 2-bar melody, and I just wanted to take that 2-bar melody and do a number of different things with it. One of the things that I wanted to do was to create a inversion, and I'm probably using that term improperly, but I wanted to invert the first 8 measures along the A or B flat axis, and then play that melody together. Didn't work out as well as I wanted. I did have to make some modifications, but this is what I came up with. It sounded good to me, and I went after it for looking at dissonances and moved them around a little bit to make sure they didn't land on a strong beat. And finally I tried to play the 3-part counterpoint, but I couldn't do it. It was the width was too far. And can you hear me now?
I do.
Oh, okay. So I'm ready. You can play it now.
All right. I heard you because I switched to
Oh,
my
okay.
other headphones on my other computer, and so not really sure what's going on there, but I'll worry about that some other time. So I'm going to play the piece, and I do want to say one thing about the adjusting some intervals. So if I have a moment at the end, remind me. I'll take a look at the William Byrd piece and show you an example of that sort of thing also. So here we
Okay.
go. Oops. Had to put in a final resolution for us there. Yeah, some great stuff in there. So
Thank you.
I have to think about this because now if I'm not going to be able to hear you, why don't you also type some stuff into the chat, John, if there's anything that you need me to hear. But I'm going to just go on and say a few things. So first of all, yeah, this is some really nice stuff. And this line in particular, is like, yeah, I love that line. I could look at it analytically and say, do I love the fact that there's a B flat on, two B flats followed by two Ds on the strong beats? If I were planning it, I would have said, no, I don't like that. But the reality is I do like it, right? So this is like parallel octaves decorated in ways that then is not a problem, but especially love the use of, again, that chromatic passing tone to allow you to land on the G. So that's especially beautiful in there. And then also the responding line and this use of the dissonance. And I like how you've kind of pointed out where your dissonance is. We talked about that during office hours, that if you're going to write at intervals, you want to calculate all your intervals, but you don't have to necessarily tell me what they all are. But if you tell me where the dissonances are, then we can look at how they resolve. So you've got that little bit of what's called a neighbor tone when you come down to a dissonance and go back up again, or vice versa. And then passing tones, and this one here is a passing tone on the beat. We can use all that kind of terminology. Here's a neighbor tone in which it goes up and back down. And so, yeah, this is all good stuff in here. So as far as that place where you're doing this and trying to make this inversion, as you're talking about, yeah, and that is the right term. You're having two lines that are, one is an inversion of the other. When one goes up, the other goes down. And so it's a really cool thing to have tried to make happen and see what you could do with it. One of the things that I want to point out about things like inversion, anytime you have this idea of, oh, I should do this thing, or maybe it's a sequence or whatever, where you have this idea that intellectually I want to do this thing, and then you go do it and you realize, oh, it's off. It's something not totally work. This is absolutely a thing, and I noticed it in the William Byrd piece right here. Check out this line. So I mentioned how at the beginning, this is imitation, right? Being answered by same exact line. Now the next line is being answered by which is almost the same, but not, right? This was a leap of a third and then down a fifth. This was a leap of a fourth and then down a fifth. So he cheated one of the intervals to get because if he had only gone up a third here from G to B flat, he would have had a dissonance against that A flat, but he really wanted that A flat. So
Right.
this idea that you might cheat an interval somewhere when you're doing an inversion or when you're doing imitation or when you're doing any of these devices, this is to be expected that it's going to happen sometimes. So anyhow, those are some of my thoughts there. Meanwhile, I'm going to flip back over, put my other headphones on so that, John, if you've got other stuff you want to say before we sign off here, you can say them. Man, I can hear.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, I'm very slow typer, or typist, so it takes me a while to put it in the comments via the chat. But I was concerned about the playability on the piano when it came to the three-part. And my thought was to separate that and have the first phrase with a piano, second phrase with a saxophone, the two combine, and then it closes out with the saxophone playing the original that the piano played. It was kind of my thought.
Gotcha. So, yeah, now I'm hearing echo because I'm picking up on two places, but I'm not going to worry about it. Yeah, I wouldn't even worry about playability for something like this. I'd be more focused on the intervals and just, the melodic development and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And, imagine that this was going to be just played by three instruments, a bass instrument and a trumpet and a saxophone or whatever.
Right.
Not even worry about making it playable, because this is not going to be playable in one hand here, the G against the C, but that C could be taken by the left hand if necessary. But that's a task for another course to worry about.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that's where I finished right, and that was the last thing, just to check playability. I couldn't play it.
Yeah, it would be tough.
Yeah.
So anyhow, now. Well, I'll leave this on for a second, but John, I want to thank you for being here as well, but I do want to now wrap things up. So any final comments from you before I wrap up?
No, thank you for having me on.
Okay. So thanks again. And in that case, I put my other headphones back on here and get to my theme music and play some of that. There we go. So thanks everyone here, and thanks for the music, thanks for the submissions, thanks for the comments in here. And this talk about intervals, when I said I want to be practical here, this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. It's one thing to read in a book what these intervals are and how to calculate them and have no concept of why they matter, what you're going to do with this information. And so I've been enjoying this process of digging in and talking about what does this really matter? How does it get used? How do composers think about this sort of stuff? Improvisers think about it also, but it's sort of like background, like I'm thinking about grammar when I'm talking, but not really, right? It just sort of becomes automatic, and it's similar when improvising. So anyhow, again, thanks everyone. I'll have the minor key stuff up for us to start chewing on next week, and we'll get to dig into learning more about minor keys and how they function, and just looking forward to continuing the journey. So thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.